Welcome to Themis Podcasts. Themis is an award-winning platform that helps our clients and community manage their financial crime risk exposure. We aim to democratise due diligence through our AI-powered AML and KYC platform, our expert research and insight into emerging financial crime threats, and our deep dive intelligence for enhanced due diligence. Find out more at wearethemis.com.
Hello and welcome to the Themis podcast. My name is Henry Wyard. I'm part of Themis's international team of financial crime researchers, investigators and technologists. And I'm delighted to be joined today by my colleague, Jennifer Downie, for the latest episode of our series on fraud, which is taking us around the world, under the skin of the latest tech developments and inside the operations of criminal organizations to understand what's happening right now in the big bad world of fraud. And you can find all about these in our latest magazine, False Profits, which includes a really excellent piece on the topic of pig butchering, written by my very esteemed guest today. So Jen, welcome to the podcast. Before we get into talking about your research, I want to start with a very, very simple question, which is, how did you get into the world of anti-financial crime?
Thanks, Henry. Great to be here today. Well, I come from a tech and marketing background, and I've seen how powerful technology can be used both for good and bad. I want to be on the side that uses it for good to make a difference. So to tackle fraud, financial crime, and be part of building systems that are going to be actually protecting people to create real change.
That's brilliant. I think much of the same reason why lots of our other colleagues at Themis joined, but it's great to have you on the podcast. So to start with, could you briefly give our audience an outline of the focus of your recent article? So which issue were you aiming to highlight, and why did it feel like a really important one to explore right now?
Sure. So I wrote an article about pig butchering, which is a prolific and devastating crypto investment scam, which originates from Southeast Asia. It's multi-layered, it's highly sophisticated. It relies on the scammer building a trusted and often, but not always, a romantic relationship with an individual. There's debate over how its name came about. Many believe the term pig butchering is used to describe fattening up a victim before they're scammed, but I've heard other experts on the scam say it relates to taking the victim for every penny they've got, literally from their nose to their tail. So there's several variations of the scam, but they all rely on building a trusted relationship with somebody, which can take many weeks, and they ultimately get someone to invest in a fake trading platform. So, for example, it could start as a supposed mistaken identity on LinkedIn, or even a seemingly wrong number text on WhatsApp, which I imagine most of us have had in the past, like something like, "Hey, Susan, are you still free to meet this week?" That type of thing. And scammers are actually trying to engage targets in casual conversations with the hope that somebody will respond. Then they can invest considerable time in building trusted relationships with those that do, and they run the scam across hundreds of targets for a higher chance of criminal success. During the scam, they claim to be able to share their crypto secrets. Often they said they're taught to them by their aunt or uncle, and they begin by asking to sign up to a legitimate trading platform. Initially, their investments make a small profit, but once their trust is established, then they persuade their victims to download a fake cryptocurrency trading app, which is actually controlled by the scammers themselves, where they can manipulate trades, they can inflate balances, and ultimately take their money. We've seen examples online of very detailed and scripted playbooks which describe exactly how the scammers are told to execute the scam. And this is where the scam gets even darker. The scammers interacting and engaging with targets on messaging platforms are likely to be victims of human trafficking. They've been hired through false job adverts. They applied for what they thought would be legitimate jobs with room and board, but when they meet their new employers, they've had their passports taken from them and then have been trafficked to scam compounds where they're held against their will and forced to carry out this horrible activity.
Well, it sounds about as horrible as the name is, and also like a very, very sophisticated operation. But I suppose my next question is, how did this scam come about in the first place? What are the origins of it?
Sure. Well, to answer that, it's helpful to learn a little bit about illicit activity tied to Chinese criminal syndicates. Since the early 2000s, Chinese organised crime groups tied to money laundering and other illicit activity have been operating large casinos and luxury resorts in unauthorized special economic zones in Southeast Asia. So, for example, along the Thai-Myanmar border, Cambodia, Laos. Through agreements with local border militias, the syndicates have profited from unregulated casinos in return for land rent. Gambling in China has actually been illegal since 1949, but here in this region, Chinese nationals can gamble without restriction. So then, obviously, suddenly in 2020, lockdowns during the COVID pandemic restricted travel and socializing, and just like regular businesses, these OCGs needed to find new ways to continue functioning profitably. Sadly, they saw a lucrative opportunity to pivot and ramp up their scam operations on a previously unimaginable scale, switching their vacant resorts and their empty casinos into scam compounds. They had the explicit intention to defraud people worldwide through these investment scams. They just redeployed workers from the online gambling and gaming industry and deceptively recruited tens of thousands of people to staff the compounds. Although Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos serve as the epicenter of this regional scam industry, nearly every country in the region plays a role in supporting these networks, from enabling the trafficking of forced labour into scam centres to providing financial channels for laundering illicit proceeds. They managed to evade crackdowns by shifting operations between compounds. So, for example, when China closed their scam hubs along the border with Myanmar in late 2023, many just relocated to Myanmar's current state and across borders into Cambodia and Laos.
That's fascinating. And I think one of the things that immediately springs to my mind there is that those important points you're raising around forced labour and human trafficking, as well as the actual scam criminal activity. So could you expand on those key findings? So what are for you, the really main insights that you wanted to bring out around forced labour and human trafficking as it relates to pig butchering? And why do you think that's such a pressing issue at this point in time?
Okay. Well, as I was saying, often people carrying out the legwork of these scams have applied for jobs that they thought were legitimate, often recruited on social media platforms. Traditionally, they would have targeted Asian IT professionals and customer care reps, but now we're seeing that the industry is getting more sophisticated, and they're also looking for people in data science and digital marketing. Sadly, there have even been cases reported of people being deceived by friends or relatives in exchange for money. So one case in 2022, a 23-year-old was tricked by a friend into what seemed like an air conditioning job in a company in Thailand, but instead they were trafficked to a scam compound in Laos. They were only released after their family paid a ransom of $12,500 US. I feel it's a particularly pressing issue right now because by 2024, the United States Institute of Peace estimated there was about 500,000 people to be allegedly forcibly involved in these scam operations across the Southeast Asia region, with people from more than 66 countries worldwide having been trafficked to these scam compounds. Revenues from this scam, the pig butchering scam, are growing by about 40%. And that was last year's figure anyway. And there's concern this is just the beginning. And of course, AI tools are a huge enabler in this scam. They give scammers the ability to alter their face and voice, meaning they can interact with multiple targets using many different fake personas in a much more credible and engaging way.
Oh, goodness me. I mean, that's sort of a terrifying message in many ways. And I thought particularly distressing that the mention of someone being recruited by their friend. Are there any other examples that you have from either your own experience or kind of casework and research that you've done that really kind of bring out the other risks and behaviours that you described in the article? So how can sort of our listeners really situate the risks that you look in the article in their own either business or personal experiences?
Sure. It's a difficult topic and it can be hard learning about both sides of the scam, but it's actually really important for us to understand how devastating and far-reaching the effects of it are, both for those trafficked doing the scamming and, of course, their victims. The unwilling recruits in these scam compounds are under constant surveillance. The compounds are typically heavily fortified with gates, guard posts, CCTV, barbed wire, barred windows, and more so to prevent workers from escaping than to keep any intruders out. Recruits are in overcrowded bunk bedrooms. They're under constant surveillance. Managers seem to live in suites and luxury condos. One compound was reported to have only 2 toilets for 450 people, which, understandably results in very unsanitary conditions. When they're working, they sit at rows of computers where they're forced to run these scams for 12 to 16 hours a day, often at night, depending on the target time zone. Their calls are constantly monitored. They can't deviate from the script, and anyone who doesn't comply or doesn't perform well enough is punished in isolation cells or blackout rooms, frequently involving torture, unfortunately. A Sri Lankan man who was trafficked in 2023 from Bangkok to Mae Sot in Western Thailand was then moved on to a compound in Myanmar, and he told how he was put in a cell for 16 days for disobeying his captors, and he was only given water mixed with cigarette butts and ash to drink, which is really quite horrific. People who've previously worked in these compounds talk about a life cycle of operations where workers are moved or sold to different compounds after several months. Often they do this at night so that they can evade detection, and they change vehicles many times. And then, of course, on the other side of this horrendous scam are the victims. They're losing their life savings, their relationships, and in some cases, even their lives. One such case is that of a Virginia man I read about. He took his own life in 2024 after he lost everything he had to a pig butchering scam when he was befriended by someone on Facebook. They'd been talking online for months and he felt they built up a close relationship. The outcome of which was he invested in a fake crypto platform. Of course, when the money disappeared, he was left with nothing. And very tragically, he took his own life just hours before his family were due to meet with him to basically give him their support and try to help get him back on his feet.
That's absolutely devastating. And I think it repeats, past research that we've done on the kind of uncounted costs of financial crime and fraud in particular, the sort of mental health crisis that's being instilled by rampant scam attempts and the types of behaviours that you've just outlined there, which are really truly horrendous. But what always kind of springs to my mind next is how widespread are these issues? Are there any key figures, statistics that help give us a sense of scale or significance of the problem?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, it's estimated to be taking around $60 billion annually from victims around the world. But we really need to remember that this figure is likely to be a lot more conservative than it should be, because more often than not, people are just too ashamed and humiliated to report the crime. To such an extent that Interpol is actually advocating to change the name from pig butchering to romance baiting to try to reduce the stigma associated with this scam. Sadly, though, because it is such a lucrative scam, we know it's spreading to other parts of the world too, as we see emerging scam compounds around different parts of the world, such as Dubai, Peru, and Sri Lanka. There is a positive note, though. However, governments are starting to react to address the scale of the problem. And just last month, there was hopeful news out of the US Congress's House Committee on Foreign Affairs looking to introduce a new bill, the Dismantle Foreign Scam Syndicates Act, which looks to establish an interagency task force. They're looking to dismantle and shut down transnational criminal syndicates that are responsible for these mass online scam operations against Americans. It specifically mentions pig butchering, and it cites that last year Americans alone lost about $10 billion. But once again, that's really likely to be far higher because just not everybody's having the confidence or ability to come forward.
Yeah, and I was reading a case as well from the Crown Prosecution Service here in the UK that was saying, I think they sort of busted a scam operation that had 49 victims who came forward, but they believed that I think around another 50 hadn't come forward to the police. So, yeah, those reported figures I think are probably, as you said, just the tip of the iceberg. Do you think people still aren't paying enough attention then when it comes to pig butchering? Are there aspects of this topic that remain overlooked or misunderstood in our kind of public regulatory media discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one aspect that's probably overlooked is the fact that there is actually potential for stolen crypto funds to be recovered, but it does require fast action and sharp blockchain tracing skills. So in the US in 2022, for example, there was an example where a victim and some family members lost a staggering $5.5 million to a pig butchering scam. But when they realized they'd been scammed, they immediately contacted the US Secret Service and they launched an investigation. This allowed them to follow the trail of the stolen funds across dozens of wallets and several coin swaps. And ultimately, they were able to move it from the scammer's wallet to an exchange. So literally by tracing every transaction precisely, they were able to recover about $5 million of the funds stolen. But it's not usually what you hear about. It really does rely on victims coming forward. It also relies on people in law enforcement understanding the scam and then having the ability to trace it, of course. To answer your question about something being misunderstood in the public or media, something that frustrates me dramatically is when the media uses language such as so-and-so fell for a scam or they were duped. It's damaging language. It puts blame and humiliation on victims. And the result of that is understandably fewer people coming forward to report what's happened to them. And it also undervalues the extent of the problem. You may also have heard of a case in France last year where a woman was defrauded out of 830,000 euros by scammers who posed as Brad Pitt. When she bravely came forward to highlight what had happened to her to help other people prevent the same thing happening to them, she was mocked and harassed to the point of her trying to take her own life 3 times. I mean, it's not what victims need when they've already been through such awful ordeals.
Yeah, that's terrible. And I know from my personal experiences of friends and family members, sadly being fallen victim to scams, that there is the mental aspect is hugely significant. Of course, it goes without saying that please, anyone listening to this podcast, if this experience has happened to you, please get in contact, either with the relevant support services in your country, or of course with us at the Themis team, if we can help from an anti-financial crime perspective.
Absolutely.
But Jen, I want to turn to sort of considering the future, which is obviously very difficult to do, but nevertheless, I back you. I back your ability to help us get some insights through the crystal ball. So how do you see the sort of trends in pig butchering evolving over the next few years? Are there emerging developments, whether they be technological, legal, behavioural, that you think could change how the issue manifests?
Absolutely. I mean, the advancement of AI tools will just worsen the situation. Technology is improving all the time. So it's just going to become harder to detect what's real and what's not. This will enable fraudsters to increase their scamming capacity and successes exponentially. You'd hope that this means that there won't be so much human trafficking involved and forced labour. They'll have tools to do it themselves. But we know that there's been a recent development that's really quite concerning, that the infrastructure in these scam compounds they have that are currently doing the pig butchering, there's now reported connections to sextortion schemes, which are targeting minors from these compounds that were originally set up to do pig butchering. Sextortion is a growing form of online blackmail. Criminals threaten to share sexual pictures, videos, or just information about someone unless they pay money. And typically these schemes targeting teenagers in the US and Europe have been run out of Nigeria, but it seems like these compounds are now running these schemes too. No doubt they're seeing the money that's been amassed from West Africa. And as I said, they already have the infrastructure and the manpower in place. So it's just another development in that area.
Yeah, I think that gets to the heart of a kind of a feature that we see frequently, which is that we need to think about these criminal operations as being run like businesses, in the same way that businesses learn from what competitors or equivalents in other countries are doing, other markets are doing, and implement those technological developments or those new business lines, so to speak. And we really need to be live to that. And I suppose that's really a kind of very valuable lesson for the financial crime policy wonks and sort of compliance specialists among us. But for those of us who aren't kind of directly at the coalface of the fight against financial crime and fraud prevention, what are some of the key things that they, as individuals, but also within their organizations, with their friends, with their families, should do to better protect themselves against the risks that you've described?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is education. We need to speak to friends and family about this horrific scam. We need people to be aware of how easily and seemingly innocently the scam can start, and then how badly it can actually end up. Secondly, don't reply to those texts that seem like they accidentally messaged your number. Block them, report them, tell your kids and grandparents to do the same. And lastly, I would suggest in the fraud prevention world, there's a well-known scam fighter called Erin West. She's an ex-prosecutor in the US who's made it her mission to lead the fight against transnational organised crime, specifically pig butchering, actually. And she speaks at conferences and regularly posts some valuable content on LinkedIn about recent developments in this area. So I'd highly recommend our listeners follow her content to keep up to date.
And of course, your content as well, Jen. Let us not forget. But no, thank you very much for those recommendations. I think there's a lot that we can all do to make ourselves more resilient. But then finally, if you had to distill your message into one key takeaway, the single thing that you'd like all of us listening to this podcast to remember, what would that be?
So I would really like people to realize that everyone's a target for scams, not just older people or those who aren't computer savvy. Every single one of us. Scamming techniques work because they're meticulously planned, they're tried and tested, they use social engineering, and as you say, they're just run like regular businesses. So instead of people feeling shame from the media or general public, we really need awareness and empathy, open conversations, because the more we talk about scams, whether it's pig butchering, sextortion, or anything else, come to think of it, just the harder it becomes for scammers to succeed.
Thank you very much, Jen. I think it's very important to end on a message of positivity and proactiveness, because there is, as you say, a lot of things that we all can do to help combat these threats. But thank you so much for sharing what I think will be for each one of us an incredibly valuable insight into this extremely
welcome.
dark world. And I think the more light that's shed onto it by people like you, the better our ability will be to be able to respond. And of course, if anyone is affected by any of the themes that we've discussed today, please do seek out support. And in the UK and Ireland, Samaritans can be contacted on free phone 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org or joe@samaritans.ie. Listeners in other jurisdictions, please contact the relevant support services there as well. And of course, for any financial crime support, please do get in contact with us here at Themis. But for now, I'll say goodbye from me, and Jen, goodbye from you.
Many thanks, Henry. Bye.
Thank you very much for joining us. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Themis Podcasts. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to find out more about Themis, please do contact us via our website at wearethemis.com or drop us an email at info@wearethemis.com. Thank you.